Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by the third broadcaster that I've had on the show recently. I'm joined by Max Thoma, broadcaster of the South Bend Cubs. Max, how's it going, man?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. It's been a long week in Arizona, and we're turning back here to Chicago. I'm broadcaster number 3, and the bar has been set pretty high, so I'm excited to get things going.
Yeah, I'm loving having you guys on. I mean, the expertise you guys bring is terrific, and I don't know. You have your partner BK to follow, so I don't know if there's a little bit of competition there. Having him on for the Tennessee Smokies preview was awesome. I guess I'll intro with that and the fact that you have worked. I don't even have this on my note sheet, so I'm going off the cuff a little bit here. But you got the chance to work with BK the past couple of years on the South Bend broadcast. What's that been like working along that duo, that tandem with you guys going?
It's been a ton of fun. Last year was our first full year together as partners, and we kind of do it differently than I think just about any minor league team does it. We have that co-number 1 thing going where, he gets a series as the lead, I get a series as the lead, and the other person kind of, does the middle innings, but that means that they get to the on-field pregame show and those post-game interviews that are a blast, especially in South Bend last year with 3 Gatorade cooler dumps every time we won, which, certainly felt like just about every single game at home. Some legendary interviews, you think about that Pertuz answer when, he talked about just wanting to make the playoffs. The duo has been fantastic. We just have so much fun. It doesn't feel like work when you have somebody in the booth that well, you spend every day with. We both love the game. We both love the guys, and we had such a fun group last year and such a fun announcing combo that it was hard to not enjoy the entirety of the 2022 season.
Yeah, you guys, you can tell that you're having a blast in the booth, and I asked BK what his favorite moment of the team last year was, and I think he just kind of hinted at the fact that that playoff run and how exciting that was and how much fun those games were. You kind of hinted at the Gatorade baths on the field, and those became commonplace. That was a very common sight to see, whether it was you or Brendan out on the field after the game getting the Gatorade cooler bath. What was your favorite moment? Was it just that environment constantly with those guys that just seemed like a great group of human beings?
Yeah, just a great group. And, Daniel Palencia kind of picked up that cooler early on in the season and just kind of started running with it. And they have 2 coolers in the dugout. And it took a decent amount of time for somebody, I think it was Pablo Aliendo, to realize that the bullpen has a cooler too. And that's coming at you from a different angle. So Pablo's hitting the player from behind. The other guys are hitting us. They're at a point in the year where they were kind of going after the announcer with one of the coolers too, which was a lot of fun. There was a funny moment, actually. I'll get to my favorite moment, but there was a funny moment near the end of the year where I interviewed Luke Little. And Luke had his little niece, who's, I'm not good with ages, but a little baby in his arms for the post-game interview. And everyone's like, dude, you got to go put her down. And, I don't know if he was doing it so that they wouldn't dump the cooler, but, knowing those guys, that wasn't going to prevent anybody from dumping anything. So luckily he pawned her back off onto, I assume, her parents, but that was pretty funny. Best moments got to be a combination of that night in Northeast Ohio when we won it all. Just seeing everybody in the clubhouse. It's kind of funny. It's almost bittersweet when you get to call the final out, because I'm looking down the field. Our whole front office is there. The whole team is there. The coaching staff is there. Everybody's on the field celebrating. We were lucky enough that they had shirts ready for us with the champions right on it. And I'm the only one there associated with the organization who's not on the field, because I'm still up in the booth tossing it down to BK for interviews. But that was a blast. And, I know we always talk about, how do you put yourself in the shoes of getting the final out of a championship, at any level. And I talked to Sheldon Reed right after. I'm like, I don't know who was more nervous in that moment, you or me, because I'm in the booth alone. The booth in Lake County is a modified closet. It is tiny, and I'm just, I got one leg up on the chair, one leg down, and I'm just like, this is the stuff that gets replayed the whole offseason. And every time we talk about the championship team, and it's like, you think about what you're going to say, but it's just in that moment, just get through it. Just get through it. So that was really fun because it came out kind of the way I wanted it to, and I thought it was pretty solid.
Had you thought a lot about it, or like did it come out the way that you had planned on calling that last play of the championship run, or did you end up like scrapping it as you're doing it, or like how'd that work?
I had the part in there that I wanted to get, and obviously this is, I can only think of this like overnight kind of going in, but I really wanted to get, on a Wednesday night just outside of Cleveland in Northeast Ohio, just felt like destiny. I wanted to get something like that in there. And then the rest is kind of just like, I talked to BK because he got to call the final out in 2019. You're hoping for a sexy final out. Like, obviously we can't get a walk-off. We're on the road. That would be like, incredibly stressful, but awesome. BK got to fly out to center. Cole Roeder was under it. It's an out. Sheldon Reed got like a cued number off the end of the bat that started foul. The batter didn't come out of the box. And it's a backhand play from BJ and a toss right back in the pitcher. And it was just like, for a few seconds there, you're like, it looked weird. And like the last thing you want is like something weird. Like, I don't want to drop third strike guys running. You've already called it strikeout. Like, you just want something good and clean. And mine was, close, but it was a great moment.
Yeah, they didn't make it easy on you for that last play. That's for damn sure. All right, so we are here to cover the 2023 South Bend Cubs and preview that team. But before we do that, you did spend last week in spring training. Talked a little bit about it with you before we hit record. But what was that experience like, being sent down and working spring training for the South Bend Cubs? How much fun do you have down there? Do you get any good sights of players doing anything crazy while you were there?
It's an absolute blast to be there. We talked about it. I've been there as a fan. I've never been there as a quote unquote employee, because it's loosely defined as work when you're out there. But just seeing all the guys on the backfield, we were there for, game one of spring training games. And we were there, real early in the day to see guys practicing on all four fields. And it looks like, on the surface, it looks like, kind of superficially like a youth all-star team where you got like the 9-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the 11-year-olds, the 12-year-olds, because there's like four fields back to back and it's the same organization. But it's that kind of backfield setting where all the fields have home plate in the same area. There's a little area to hang out in the middle. And you feel like you're at like a Cooperstown tournament for like 13-year-olds. Except the guys out there are obviously unbelievable. But it's so fun to see all the coaching staff from our team, from years past, from the whole organization, to see guys, those coordinators that we get throughout the entire year, the Justin Stones, the Jared Banners, who go around every farm system, but they get to see everybody in one place. We get to see a lot of people that we haven't seen in a while. Guys coming back from injuries, see how they're doing. Guys for the championship run. It's just so cool because so used to only seeing in any given year the guys that we have in South Bend, which is, in any given year, I think we had 73 guys last year that, suited up for us, including rehabs. But to see everybody in the organization in one setting and to see it's awesome. We got some great content. I think what stood out the most to me was watching Cade Horton throw for the first. I've never seen him in person. I've watched him a ton at OU last year. But to see him in person in front of a crowd of, probably like 8 to 10 Cubs employees and Jim Callis and me, was just cool. Man, it was about as quiet as a field as you've ever seen or heard. It was silent, and to watch that guy just go through 2 innings of work was certainly something special.
Everyone just absolutely locked into what Cade was doing. Did you get to call any of Cade Horton's games last year in college?
No, never got to call him in college or anything. But yeah, I'm really excited. And that was like my first day on the backfields. So I wanted to videotape it, and I'm like, this place was silent, and it was field 1, which is kind of not with the other 4 in the backfield where all the guys are practicing and playing. And I'm like, is it kosher if I pull out my phone right now? Because it was just everybody was so locked in on, not even who was hitting against them, just really what he was doing. And Brandon Birdsell was throwing the same time too. So I got to see a little bit of Brandon. Obviously 2 guys we could have this year. Cade maybe not till second half. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
But special arms.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into some of those college picks that might be in South Bend this year. Let's go ahead and start with the preview here. So if you guys out there listening are looking for the Iowa Cubs preview, I did that with Alex Cohen a couple weeks ago. Last week was the Tennessee Smokies preview with Brendan King, because he got to talk about some guys that he saw with you, Max, in South Bend last year. And then coming up next week, we've got the Myrtle Beach Pelicans preview with Sam Wiederhaft. That's going to be a blast as well. So today we're talking about the South Bend Cubs. going into 2023, their first game is coming up fast, man. Like I'm sitting here and we got snow. It's snowing in Central Illinois right now. I am the South Bend Cubs. Their first game is at the Quad Cities on Friday, April 7th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Friday, April 7th at 7:30. And I'm like that. We're a few weeks away, like a couple weeks away from that. And I'm thinking we might see snow. You were actually supposed to be down here calling an ISU game that got canned because of cold weather, and now it's snowing and no good. I can't imagine we're going to see actual minor league baseball in a couple weeks.
Yeah, you know what's crazy that I'm talking to you? My weekend schedule has been so fluid. I was supposed to be doing just Mizzou, Tennessee baseball this weekend, then throwing in the Illinois State game. Then they canceled the Mizzou spring football game. So they wanted to broadcast all 3 games. I couldn't do 2, so they were like, "We'll probably have a guy for the 3rd." And then I was just Illinois State. We were going to do it in person. That was going to be a blast. And then they canceled that due to, looking outside. It's pretty cut and dry.
That's how it works with Midwest baseball for college season, and especially minor league season coming up. Let's go ahead and dig in. We're going to follow the same format in last episodes. I'm going to send out the the same reminder I said for the previous 2 episodes, that we don't know what the rosters look like in South Bend. We don't know who will be assigned to the affiliates yet. So anybody that we kind of talk about today are just kind of like more or less like my projections as to who we will see start off the year in South Bend. A guy might actually start in AA Tennessee. He might start down in Myrtle Beach. He might be held back in extended spring training. We don't know. These are just assumptions. It's a chance to talk about players that we could see in South Bend. We'll always take advantage of that opportunity. We'll start off with the starting pitchers. And I guess that actually since you led off, or since you already kind of mentioned Cade Horton and Brandon Birdsell, I'll probably start off with those guys. There's a good chance. The Cubs last year in the summer drafted a ton of starting pitchers. Like, they drafted a ton of pitchers. And so, especially in the back end of this rotation, we might see a guy like Brandon Birdsell start the season in South Bend. We might see Cade Horton in the second half of the year. We saw Brody McCullough play in Myrtle Beach last year. There's several pitchers that were drafted. It's going to be interesting to see a guy assigned a high A, especially if, like, I'm picturing Brandon Birdsell first, right? Like, he seems like the ideal guy to kind of start. He played in the Big 12. He could start in high A and skip over low A Myrtle Beach. That's quite the experience for a guy like that, jumping all the way up to high A.
Yeah, I think Birdsell would certainly be a candidate of those guys to start with us, because he turns 23 next week, actually. So he'll be 23 before the season starts. Your Big 12 pitcher of the year from last year. Kind of a guy who, kind of like Jordan Wicks, has been there, done that against very high-level college competition. And then we've seen the Cubs kind of hold back college arms, especially after drafting them. We saw Wicks at the very end of 2021 for, just a few outings. That first outing was just 1 inning at home. Just kind of got his, feet wet before his first full season. And, you could totally see Birdsell starting with us and, having an electric year. I'm sure he's probably not used to pitching in the weather that we will, have most likely, I'll say. I know last year opening day was in the 30s, and then we went extra innings. We had bonus baseball day 1 last year. We had some snow in the 10th. But, yeah, he's certainly an arm to look at. I think kind of given the age and the experience, I think it would be a fair guess to venture that he would be in our rotation come opening day. But, kind of like you said, these are all kind of estimations, kind of, educated guesses. But, looking at your projections, Brian Smith on Twitter always posting that breakdown of every team is always a great place to look to try to get a feel for the whole farm system.
Yeah, it's always fun. I know I have the same looking thing that what Brian has in an Excel sheet, and all kinds of updates throughout the offseason as we're signing minor league free agents. Guys get bumped down, all that good stuff. And speaking of guys getting bumped down, we talked last week about the absolutely loaded rotation in Tennessee to start the year. And that's because a lot of those guys were in with you guys in South Bend to end the year last year. The DJ Herz's and Jordan Wicks and Daniel Palencia's of the Luis Devers, like those guys will be in the Tennessee rotation. But because that Tennessee rotation is so stacked, that bumps down some guys that you've already seen in South Bend last year that will probably be repeating, not necessarily repeating the level. Some guys, yes, but just back in South Bend to get some more work before they climb up the ladder even more. I'm looking at guys like Porter Hodge and Luke Little and Cole Franklin and Richard Gallardo. Those big 4 especially We'll dig into each of those guys a little bit here, but all super talented players. Let's start off with Porter Hodge because he's the guy that kind of like jumped onto radars last year. One big dude. I think that last week BK and I described him as a guy that's like he gets off the bus and like he looks like a dude that can go and get you some innings and perform really well because he's just an intimidating presence on the mound. But like he was pretty damn good last year for you guys in South Bend.
Oh, phenomenal. And, BK and I, whenever we're asked about, at what point in the season did you really know that you guys would win the championship? I think that biggest moment I think that we've always talked about was DJ and Wixie getting bumped up. We got Devers first. You see the numbers, but then you see what he did for us in a couple starts. And then post All-Star break, game 1 on a Friday night, I think, in South Bend, first game of the, quote-unquote second half. Was Porter Hodge, and we never really get to see guys in person until they're literally throwing for us in a game, unless you catch a side or a bullpen before. But it was the break, and we weren't even there. And yeah, Porter Hodge went out, and him and that Devers combo at the front of our rotation near the end of the year was just dynamite. And yeah, he is one of those guys. You just watch him off the bus, you watch him on the mound, you walk by in the locker room, and you go, that looks like a big leaguer. And he's got that kind of arm. And I remember talking to TC, our pitching coach, about, what kind of makes his stuff special. And he was teaching me about, pronation and whatnot. And, the cut movement that, Porter's able to pick up on that fastball and how much that played for him last year, how big of a step that was for him. And, we always talk about guys that are like handcuffed, and it's a great problem to have. Starting pitcher wise, kind of double A, high A right now, like, yeah, we have to have guys that start here because you can't bump up the entire starting rotation when we had a couple guys go up last year. But it'll be exciting to see some arms, and we're happy as long as a lot of these guys stay with us. Obviously, we want them to move up, but hey, the more games we have Porter pitch for us, if he starts with us this year, I'll be happy every week I see his name in the starting rotation.
Yeah, and you talk about a guy with all the talent in the world with Porter Hodge. Like he was a high school draft pick from Utah, I believe, which is like not exactly a hotbed for baseball talent, and like. He just took a little bit of pro coaching. All it takes is some pro coaching like that, and those natural skills that you mentioned the ways that he can throw the ball, the pronation and stuff like that, the natural spin that he gets on that baseball because of what he has. You get that some pro coaching. You get him with TC to start off this year for the year last year, and good things can happen. Another guy that is super super talented that you got to see all year last year was Cole Franklin, and he ran. That man ran into some tough luck on the mound. Like it just seemed like he would like, yeah, dude. Like it seemed like he would give up like a bloop, and then a little dribbler to third base that a guy would get on. Then he'd get an out, and then he'd give up one hard hit ball in the inning, and it would just kind of unravel from there. Like it was just a bizarre kind of year. I think part of that with Cole was that he was getting back into like the regular swing of things. Right, he dealt with some injury troubles the previous couple of years, and for him to come back and kind of wear that on the chin a little bit last year, I think that's probably good for his development long term. He's shown the ability to kind of bounce back from that tough luck. I'm excited to see him like really show off his skills this year. I know we're expecting to see a new slider from Cole this season, and that's going to be huge for his development too.
Yeah, I think the new slider is going to be massive. But a guy who always, first off, has like the best personality of anybody you're going to have on your team. So you always love to see Cole, because he's always going to give you great interviews, great quotes, and just be a fun guy that loosens up the entire dugout. Great clubhouse guy. But I think you got to keep goals in mind here as well. I remember talking to Cole before last year, and goal 1 was pretty simple. It was have a healthy year, and Cole had a healthy year, so he got all these innings logged that he wasn't able to do before, which is huge for guys because it's hard to judge numbers when guys are never healthy. I mean, look at what Jeremiah Estrada did last year. He had barely pitched in minor league baseball. You get that guy for a healthy year, boom, he moves from high A to, pitching innings with the Cubs and doing so with that invisible fastball at a high level. But yeah, so I think this is a big year for Cole because now he got all those innings under him. He got to work on some stuff, got to get healthy, stayed healthy all offseason, which is huge for him because we haven't really seen that, especially last year. And now as he starts to develop, that fastball is always going to play. But yeah, man, the batting average on balls in play, every time we looked at it last year, it was just like, man, because you love to see a spray chart with some exit velos, because it just felt like every time there was a shallow fly ball to the outfield with Cole out there on the mound, you kind of just expected it to find some grass somewhere. And then, he might get a little frustrated on the mound. And then, if you're sitting fastball and you get a Cole fastball and put a barrel on it, you're going to hit pretty hard. But yeah, interesting to see what he adds the slider, a little older presence. Maybe you start him in high A. He goes out there and just kind of is one of those guys that's maybe here for a month, build some confidence. You see that with position players and pitchers all the time. When we got Canario last year, you knew, obviously he's an outfielder, but you're like, he shouldn't be here. We'll probably have him for a few weeks. He'll mash some balls and then move to Tennessee. And kind of the same thing happens with Cole.
Yeah. The batting average on balls in play with him was the most unsustainable thing. I don't have the number pulled up in front of me, but like just watch. All you had to do was watch him, and I think that's the important thing about as we're sitting here like covering prospects that I think fans at the major league level will look at a line like Cole Franklin, like a season line for Cole Franklin, and just be like, oh, like that was a bad season. And I wouldn't necessarily constitute last year as a bad season for Cole. I mean, I think that like obviously the overall stats weren't great, but like when watching him pitch, I didn't come away frustrated or like I'm sure he did because he watched those bloops fall in, but like I didn't come away frustrated with like his development path entirely. I'm excited to see him this year in 23 and how he bounces back and learn from what happened in 22.
And I know in the back half of last year we had some outings from him. Like the West Michigan one, I think a Wisconsin one, where he kind of a few times in a row went out and gave you like a really, really strong 3 to 4 innings, and then kind of tapered off a little bit. But he was dealing with not throwing for a while, just kind of get that muscle memory back and control the command throughout a lot of the season that you have to do in live games. And then we saw some great flashes, and now we're hoping this year we get him going longer in the games, more consistent, and see him out there in the 5th inning. He had probably the best start of his career near the end of the last year. So he had some really great outings, and I'm sure he'll be coming in. Guy who's never short of confidence, so he'll be feeling pretty good about that arm come opening day.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. There's another guy that's just kind of performed, like he's performed pretty decently over the course of his minor league career. We forget how young Richard Gallardo is. He spent a decent chunk of the year. Again, he was a call up from Myrtle Beach up to South Bend during the year last year. And he just kind of got the job done. He was flashing towards the end of the year, especially. He was flashing a curveball that I thought was probably his best pitch that he has at this point. And because with Gallardo, you're always a little bit worried about like the swing. He needs to generate some more swings and misses, but he knows how to pitch. And when he brought that curveball up and got that a little bit better, that might be that swing and miss pitch that he's missing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually just messaged Brian Smith about this last week. I was like, because I saw Gallardo on the backfield pitching against the Oakland A's, minor league teams probably going to be in Double-A this year. And yeah, I think the tough thing was last year when he got called up was we were comparing him to all these guys that we had who were absolutely electric and piling up Ks with the best of them. And Gallardo was pitching more to contact, so it wasn't as sexy. His lines at the end of the day could be 5 innings, 2 earned runs. Solid day. But you look and he only got 1 K, maybe 2 Ks, and walk maybe 3. But yeah, I think the curveball, I'm hoping to see that come back better. And I'm hoping there's been an adjustment to the fastball. I can't speak to whether or not there has been or is, but whether he's going, with some more cut or with 2-seam action, because his fastball doesn't generate a whole lot of swing and misses, and it's kind of sitting your mid to low 90s and pretty straight. And I think that's kind of a pitch that didn't work for him great moving from low A to high A. So I'm hoping there's some kind of variance there this year. But certainly a guy who, has gotten the job done in his Cubs minor league career, and I think you could probably peg as maybe being a potential breakout arm.
Yeah, it's funny because like I feel like Gallardo is the polar opposite of Cole Franklin, right? Where Cole Franklin has like the crazy stuff. He just doesn't have the results to back it up. And then Gallardo, the stuff isn't quite as nasty, isn't nearly as nasty, but he does have some actual numbers, some good numbers to back it up. Like they're polar opposite people. I know that we have people over at Northside Bound constantly in the comments kind of calling out that we don't mention Richard Gallardo enough in like the top prospects in the system. And I think that like that's the tricky part of it all, right? It's like it's balancing those results with the stuff that he has. I think that if we see him in South Bend, I'm curious to see how he performs, but then I'm really going to be curious with Gallardo, seeing him climb up the ladder, because we know that jump up to Double-A is you start to see some really tough hitters in the box. And so like seeing how that stuff generates more swings and misses at the higher levels is going to be huge for Richard.
Yeah, and he got his foot wet at the very end of the year in Double A too.
Yeah,
He
that's true.
finished the year on their roster, so got some postseason experience, got some Double A experience, which I think is always big for guys. Going forward, it doesn't always go the best, and you want guys to end on a high note going into the offseason. I'm always thinking about Michael McAvee now because he got the save for us in Game 2 of the championship, locked it down, huge pop up to third base to end the game, and then after the year ended, he went up to Double A Tennessee, pitched in the playoffs. He had like a Cole Franklin inning going with numbers, guys finding their way on bases, balls not hit that well, but he gave up a couple of runs, and you're like, man, that guy deserved to end the year, with champagne in his hand in the dugout, and gets sent up to Double A, had an inning that maybe didn't go his way, but you're hoping to still feel good going into next year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about another guy that ended the year in South Bend. The starting rotation is fun to talk to you about because you've already seen all these dudes. Luke Little is one large human being. There's a picture that Sam Wiederhaft posted on social media this week.
Sadly, Sam and I are about the same height, so I know that photo.
I mean, like, Luke Little is a large man. It's so appropriate that his name's Luke Little. He's a large man and he pitches like it, right? He's got the high 90s fastball. He's got the wipeout slider. Like, he uses every bit of that size when he's on the mound. And I know that there's always that reliever risk with a guy like Luke Little. I'm curious to see how they can, because last year he didn't really pitch like a starting pitcher. He started games, but he never really went more than 3 or 4 innings at a time. I'm curious to see how he's used this year, but the dude, talk about a dude who just produced results. Like, he was great last year.
Yeah, and I think that's something that obviously we know that like minor league guys aren't going out there and chucking 6 innings in April, depending on the organization. We don't really see it with us, but I think a couple months into the year, you get to midsummer, you're hoping Luke Little's out there, and you see more of the endurance side. You see him throw in the first inning, and then keeping that fastball in the mid 90s, maybe come a 5th inning, which would be crazy. And obviously, he was such a contrast to everybody else in our rotation last year. That you go out, everybody on our team was really, high velo fastball guys, but we had, after DJ got bumped up, we were all righty heavy except that Little day, where all of a sudden, you got 6'8" coming at you from, southpaw side with a high velo fastball and a great breaking ball. And it was just such a contrast. And actually in the playoffs, when we obviously had to shorten the rotation a little bit, had more days off, and they moved him to the bullpen, and him in the pen piggybacking Daniel Palencia was probably about the biggest contrast I could picture. You're talking, Palencia might be 6 feet. He's probably 5'11". Yeah. But 5'11", here's 101 at you from the right side to here's 6'8" lefty coming at you. I mean, I can't imagine trying to make that adjustment mid-game. But yeah, to see Little with more on his plate in terms of what he's asked to do this year, and at the high level, I'm really excited to see what he comes out with as a guy who's just a great fiery competitor out there on the hill.
Last week I was talking a little bit about Jordan Wogu and how I'd be curious to see where he would have been ranked in like the Cubs prospect rankings of the past, like right where the 2017 to 2020 or whatever, like those rankings where like Jordan Wogu probably would have been like at least a top 10 prospect in the Cubs farm system. And I think that's like really appropriate with a guy like Luke Little, where Luke Little a few years ago would have been Braylon Marquez ranked in the top 3 prospects in the Cubs system, right? I mean, like, they're both huge lefties that touch triple digits, that have that slider, that put up like, if you go back and look at their numbers, if you compare Braylon Marquez, his numbers when he was there to Luke Little, very similar numbers. It's like we're seeing Luke Little in like the 20s range in top prospect list. So like this is a no joke guy, and I think that like to say that, like, to make those comparisons to Braylon Marquez are appropriate in terms of like where our hype level should be for him.
Yeah, and you think about even just the lefties now with Hers, with Ferris, with Wicks, with Little. I mean, that's a pretty loaded combination of strictly just lefty arms right now moving their way through the system. And yeah, I've seen tweets from from you and from other people covering the Cubs farm system with that comp, especially the Myrtle Beach comp. I think with the crazy strikeout numbers.
Yeah.
But yeah, to see a lefty at that age so dominant at any level is pretty special. We'll see if we can do it in a high A starting the year.
For sure. All right, man. You want to go ahead and transition to the bullpen here? I know that there's fewer guys in this bullpen that'll be in South Bend than Iowa. To have a bullpen looking like Iowa is impossible throughout the entire system. And even some of the top end guys that we expect to be in Tennessee, like Zach Lee and Jake Reindl, who you guys saw in South Bend last year. But I think that the collection of arms that we could see in the South Bend bullpen could be interesting. Giovanni Cruz and Chase Watkins are two guys that we might see in South Bend this year that especially catch my eye. Two very different pitchers, Giovanni Cruz and Chase Watkins.
A couple of big guys.
But a couple of huge human beings.
Yeah.
And I think I'm probably riding the Giovanni Cruz hype train harder than anybody in the world right now. And I have been for a few years. But it's fun, dude. Like he's a fun guy to watch pitch.
Yeah, I mean, Giovanni signed back in 2016, and since I think the end of 2019 has logged 13 2/3 innings, which is crazy because we talked about Cole, you talked about Estrada earlier, and guys who just battled injuries. Because he had the COVID year, didn't pitch in 21, only threw a very, very few amount of innings. I think it was 13 1/3 maybe this year. But you talk about Porter Hodge getting off the bus and looking like a big leaguer, man. Giovanni Cruz looks like a big leaguer. I mean, that dude is one of those guys where it's hilarious to actually read what he's listed as because it's just nowhere close. I'm sure Giovanni's probably 6'4", 6'5", and like 240 to 245. I mean, he's just a massive dude. And when he's healthy, I really, really hope that Giovanni has a healthy 2023 because, I mean, that fastball is electric. He's got a great breaking ball. To see him, there was a funny story last year when Wade Miley was throwing in the bullpen the day before he made a start. And Giovanni was coming back from injury. Valencia was coming back from injury. So they were just out there doing touch and feels, just kind of getting the feel back for the arm. And they were like, apparently, touch and feels throwing about 96, 97 miles an hour. And there's Wade Miley, sitting on the bullpen bench about to, I love Wade. He's got great stuff. He's got a great career. But about to top out at probably 88 with that cut fastball. And apparently he just looked at, I think TC and maybe whoever else was out there and was like, man, these guys throw hard. And they didn't really have the nerve to tell them exactly how hard they were throwing and that this was just a pep and feel. They were just trying to get the arm back and going. But Giovanni Cruz is, I mean, you stand next to that guy, and he looks like a guy who's going to go out there in the ninth inning and just simply blow away everybody and only need 2 pitches to do so. So you give that guy a healthy year. I mean, he's older. He signed in 2016. I think he pitched that year. I think he pitched in 17. Had some great numbers, in the DSL and the ACL, and had that one kind of bad year. But when he's going and when he's healthy, that's a guy who, if he started with us and you were trying to say, who's going to be our Jeremiah Estrada or Nicholas Padilla, and a guy who could go out, have a good month, have a good 6 weeks, move up, have a good 4 weeks, 5 weeks, be in AAA, and then maybe be, a few good outings or an injury or 2 away from debuting MLB. You give Giovanni a full healthy year, that would probably be my guess to move through from us to higher levels quickly.
The parallels between Giovanni and Jeremiah Estrada can continue all day, right? I mean, like it's signed as young guys. I mean, Jeremiah out of the draft and then Giovanni out of the international free agent market, but then initially playing as starting pitchers, then and with electric stuff, making their way up to Eugene when Eugene was in the system, which I miss Eugene so much. Making their way up to Eugene and then missing a few years because of injury, making their way to the bullpen, switching over to being fastball slider heavy pitchers. Like there's a lot of parallels between the two. So I'm really excited to see hopefully a healthy season. Is there anybody else, I guess, in the bullpen that you want to specifically mention? I know that there's a lot of guys, like I said, not exactly jumping off the page in terms of like MLB potential, but the Frankie Scalzos of the world and Brad Depperman might be back in South Bend. We got Sal Gonzalez, who was a trade acquisition last year for Michael Givens. Like there's a lot of names that are interesting. And I'm kind of curious to see who breaks out from that like big glut of arms that we might see in the South Bend bullpen.
Yeah, and our bullpen was great last year, and there were a lot of, like you see with a lot of bullpens, guys who have kind of been figuring it out, maybe 3 or 4 year college guys who are a little bit older. So I think it's kind of sometimes tough, especially for you guys, to try to predict who's going to be on every single roster. But yeah, we'll miss, Zach Lee and Jake Reindl. Those 2 sliders were just absolutely filthy. I mean, I remember seeing one from Zach Lee that I could probably pull up on Twitter that I still watch, like, maybe once a month or twice a month, where you're just like that. I don't get it. Like, I need Lance Brozdowski next to me explaining to me how that was possible, but like dumbing it down to my level because he just threw a wiffle ball is what it looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see if guys like, I've seen like maybe we might get Sheldon Reed back, maybe an Adam Lasky back, two guys who, were great ACC pitchers back into the bullpen kind of type guys. Sheldon Reed last year for us in August and September just really started to click and seems like, if we got him, he'd probably be our 8th or 9th inning guy, could go out there and just, make high A guys look silly for a month or two. But I'm excited. Bailey Reed is another guy who's kind of battled with injuries, but who, I talked to our trainer from last year, Seth Clapp, who, congratulations, is moving up to AA as the Tennessee trainer. I think one of the youngest, not the youngest, AA trainer, by the way, of minor league baseball. But he was talking about Bailey Reed's stuff and how just, the metrics, not a lot of stuff that they feed us announcers, but the metrics on, his two-seam fastball and his slider are just incredible. But, injuries and control, especially the control element hasn't been there. So if he's a guy who in the offseason has that confidence and has built that control and he can come back and maybe locate those two pitches, he could be another candidate maybe to move up quickly.
Yeah, Bailey Reed was a guy that I kind of was thinking about too. He was the Cubs have been extraordinarily good at scouting plays in the draft, or in Bailey Reed's case, he was an undrafted free agent. But they've been really good recently in guys like that, where you're getting them on day 3 of the draft, you're getting them undrafted, that just like showcase really good stuff. And it's the advanced metrics that we're not even like, we don't have, I don't have access to seeing. But Bailey Reed falls in that same category as like the Zach Lees of the world, where it's like Zach Lee was not good in college, like stats wise, but like he came, got some coaching, like we've talked about before on this episode. Right. And Bailey Reed falls in that category really well. And so like, I think again, hoping for health from him. And I think that he can take off pretty well. All right. I think that's all we got for the arms. So we'll go and transition into some of the bats here, because it's a fun lineup in South Bend this year. Like I think that I could probably say that at every single affiliate as far as the hitters go, because there's some stacked outfields going on. There's one. Let's just start off with the one particular name that I'm most excited about in the system this year, and I think that you probably are manning the outfield in South Bend, and most fans are. We've gotten a taste of him because he's on the 40-man roster. We've seen him in spring training with the big league team. Kevin Alcantara he could take off this year in South Bend, man. Like he put up good numbers. We saw that he was successful last year in Myrtle Beach, but we know going from Myrtle Beach, that's a pitcher's paradise, up to South Bend, that's more neutral in terms of pitchers and hitters. That hitters can absolutely take off. And I think that Kevin Alcantara, like we're ready for it, man. Like we're ready to see that happen.
So I got to see him for the first time ever in person in spring training. He was hitting back-to-back with Wogu and BP. And, I mean, balls were flying out of the yard. I'll say that. But, yeah, it's also fun to, we're looking at the end of last year, and then you, project what's going to come this year, and you're like, well, can we really be as good as we were at the end of last year? And then you look at spot by spot, you're like, just pencil in the outfield's going to be loaded, because it's going to be loaded again. And then you think about, you're like, who we got a third, who we got a short, who we got a second. You're like, there's most of your team right there, position player wise, and all very solid. But Alcantara is just different because, you think about what we saw from Pete last year, and talk about two very, very different people, even though they're usually ranked 1 and 2 and, at the top of anybody who's ranking any minor leaguers across all of baseball. But 6'6", 6'7", just freak athlete. I remember seeing videos from him last year in Myrtle where you just see how smooth and fluid that swing was, and you're like, what are they teaching this guy? What kind of adjustments are they making with this swing?
Yeah.
Because it just looks so incredible. I'm super excited to see him. Great energy. When he's played in the spring training games, he's digging for extra bases in spring training, turning that single into a double, getting that extra base. I want to see how much ground he covers, because I don't think there's a better center fielder out there, especially in the minor league level, than Pete. But Alcantara's obviously got those huge strides and that massive frame. He's much taller than Pete was, but we're going to be very spoiled with center field play for these 2 years here in South Bend. Yeah.
What's really stood out to me with Alcantara is the athleticism, right? And I think when you have a guy that's 6'5", 6'6", however tall he is, he's a big dude, that you're worried about that athleticism not being there. If the athleticism takes a step back, then you just got a big lanky dude that like is not
Yeah.
fluid on the base path, fluid in the outfield. And I think a big thing is that athleticism translates to him at the plate, where you're always worried about a guy with long levers, like swinging and missing a lot, especially on fastballs in, right? That was always a problem. That was always not a problem. That was always a concern with Chris Bryant as he came up to the system. It's like, all right, is he going to be able to get to those inside fastballs? Kevin Alcantara did that last year in Myrtle Beach. Now, can he continue? Like the debate on whether he can continue to do that as he climbs up to the system, as he continues to fill out a little bit like that, we got to just keep an eye on that. But like so far, he's been extraordinarily good at keeping his hands in and making contact with those inside fastballs. And I kind of credit that to his athleticism more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, he came in just so raw. And, I mean, he talked about just, try to picture him in 2 to 3 years when he's hit the weight room and the Cubs have had, a handful of years to have him gain some weight. It's hard to gain weight when you're 6'6", 6'7", and you're as skinny as he is. I'm sure he's working his butt off in the weight room. But once that guy puts on some strength, because, I mean, he can already, with that kind of swing, the kind of whip that he generates, he can drop bombs. But, it's only going to get better and better. And, yeah, I mean, that's going to be such a fun guy to watch this year and just, in the future as well. But projecting this outfield, there's just so many guys that you could just see playing at Wrigley in the next couple of years and, being like everyday starters, not guys that are just, in there as, bench guys getting in for people on backup days, but out there as everyday guys.
Yeah, sticking in the outfield a little bit. I mean, we talked last week with BK about Yohendrick Pinango and how he might, because of the outfield with Owen Casey and PCA and Jordan Wogu up in Double-A, we might see Yohendrick back in South Bend this year. He might be up in Double-A, but it's like that's a dude that I think is potential to be like a top 20 guy in the system. Obviously, great hand-eye coordination, great bat-to-ball skills. And I thought he was improving in the outfield. I thought his defense in left field got better as the season wore on. I don't think it's something that's like I wouldn't consider it to be like a plus defensive tool. But when you make as good quality contact as you do at the plate, you don't have to have that super incredible defense and outfield like carry you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think he grew a lot as just a person last year overall. But it is crazy. I mean, there's no reason for Pete to be back with us. Pete will be moving up. There's, Wogu with his age and low key, I don't think enough people were talking about how well Jordan Wogu played last year, especially towards the end. The last handful of weeks, he was leading the Midwest League in a lot of offensive categories, especially in the slugging department and our team. But with his age, with his college experience, you assume him and Pete move up, and then it becomes a question of, Owen and Pinango. They're both really young. Last year, they started OC a little aggressive with that South Bend assignment, but and Pinango we had for a little bit actually at the back end of 2021. But you talk about bat-to-ball skills. There's not a place anywhere near the box where if you threw it, Pinango couldn't find a way to barrel it. He hits a home run. You're like, that's a neck-high 97-mile-an-hour fastball. That's like on the inner half. Like, there's no reason he should have done anything with that other than maybe pop it up on the infield. Yeah. But then you have the element of also super aggressive swinger, does not walk. So we'll see about the plate discipline, because when guys have kind of figured out a pitch that he will swing and miss at against that particular guy, change up in the dirt, they'll double up, maybe triple up on that. And he's not a guy who in at least the past kind of had the discipline to not chase the same kind of pitch over and over again. Mm-hmm. But look at what he did from July 1st through like July 24th, when he had like 4 more hits than anybody at any level of minor league baseball, because he was just slapping the ball everywhere. And for a guy with not a large frame, he's got scoreboard power in South Bend. He's hit our video board many times. Just incredible, the strength that he generates and the power that he possesses. But I think anybody who can barrel up that many pitches has it within them to have plate discipline, just because he sees it so well. There's no way that you couldn't, imagine him as maybe a 22 or 23-year-old kind of really figuring out how to get on base more.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I hadn't really considered that with Pinango before. That's a really good point where, like, because of that hand-eye coordination is so good that it might be able to translate later on down the road. And
he was 19 like most of the year last year. So, how many 19-year-olds are, sitting in a minor league affiliate somewhere being like, I really want to draw a lot more walks. You know, they want us with the bat. I get it.
Yeah, yeah. One more guy in the outfield that you probably haven't had a good look at is Parker Chavers, because he was in the tail end of the season. He ended up in Myrtle Beach. Did you get a chance to see Chavers down in spring training at all?
I didn't. I've seen highlights from him in Myrtle, and I know the name because it just seems like every year we get one or two coastal guys.
Yeah.
And Myrtle always loves posting coastal guys, so I know he's another one.
Yeah, and Parker, I've been trying to keep Chavers on the radar as far as like for prospect fans out there, because we talk about Alcantara being like really fluid in the field, right? Like very like he looks smooth. Parker Chavers is smooth as hell out there. Like I think that like the speed is not necessarily elite, but he plays a damn good center field because he gets good jumps, because he takes a direct path to the ball. At the plate though, the numbers obviously not great. He was coming back from the injury last year, but I think that assuming he gets assigned to South Bend this year, it's going to be curious with Parker Chavers, and Christian Franklin is another guy that I kind of throw in the same boat. College draft picks a couple of years ago, same general vibe. But with Parker Chavers, if he gets assigned to South Bend, I think that he might be the starting center fielder with Alcantara and right. He might be in left field. We might see where they end up putting him. But I just like at the plate, the swing is pretty as hell, man. Like it is. I threw the like. I am very careful. I'm very careful with comps because like I don't want people to think that like I'm comping the player to the player. But like the swing, when you watch him take a swing, the swing reminds me of Bryce Harper, and like he doesn't have the power that Bryce Harper has. He's not as good as Bryce Harper. That's not possible. But just like the swing itself is very Bryce Harper like in that fluidity through the zone.
So we rarely get to watch, other affiliates play live because we're usually playing at the same time. But a lot of times Myrtle at home has Sunday night games, and we'll be on the bus coming back, and we'll see them, especially if they're on marquee and they throw it on the TV. And I remember Chavers being up at the plate, and I've heard infinite number of stories and tales of how hard it is to hit in Myrtle, and especially for lefties. And you look at OC's numbers, that makes sense. You see it. Matt Mervis's numbers, obviously, I think more than anybody else from like 21 to 22. You're like, man, the ballpark had to be playing some kind of factor there. But I saw Chavers last year have one at bat, and just he hit an absolute nuke to right center. And I'm like, oh my Lord. And this ball did not land over the wall and was a double. And I'm like, oh my God, that looked like it was absolutely destroyed. But I love the swing. And it was just like, man, I think at South Bend that was decently gone.
It's pretty, man. Yeah, it's a pretty swing for sure. All right, we can get in some fun with the infield, but before we get to the infield, because that's really fun, let's talk about the catchers real quick. Again, two guys that I know you haven't seen, in Ethan Hearn and Hayden McGeary, that will likely be in South Bend, but like it cracks me up because those guys are very different players, Ethan Hearn and Hayden McGeary. Ethan Hearn is a guy that actually performed fairly well at the plate, considering that he was in Myrtle Beach, considering he's a catcher, considering his age, all that good stuff. But something that kind of stands out to you is the electricity that he has on the diamond.
Yeah, so I mean, when I look at his numbers, you see a guy who, especially for a catcher, like you said, slugs decently well. Love to see the OBP. I think it was 113 points higher than his average. Draws a lot of walks. Also, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of Ks, a lot of walks. Pretty solid slugging. He's a catcher, so you like kind of a lot of those metrics that you see. But what sticks out with me, and I think it's because Myrtle always has that same intro video when they're on marquee of the clips they show when you get like Reindl with the no-no and he spikes the glove and he's got the hair flowing and everything. But there's the one of Hearn getting into third. I don't know if it's a triple or, whatever. He just went first and third or got somebody in and he's just flexing on you at third and yelling. Because I remember that was at Cubs convention, the Myrtle Beach booth had a little monitor that was showing clips throughout the year. And I remember seeing that, and Sam Wiederhap was telling me about Ethan Hearn. I'm like, that's him right there in the video, right? He's like, oh yeah, that's him. And I'm like, that's electric factor. You just love guys who are bringing that kind of energy day in and day out, and especially when it's from a catcher, because you just feel like that also makes them such a great leader when they're the guy out there handing the ball. You feel like at any point that person can go out to a pitcher and just light a fire under him.
Dude, I remember it was throughout the season. And Ethan was like he would steal a base, or he would leg out an infield hit, or he'd hit a triple, and he would just be standing on the base, looking at the dugout, just screaming, "I am fast!" And I was just like, this is terrific, man. You're right. He's just an electric factory. I think that rubs off on the pitchers. That we saw like we saw Jake Reindl. We see how he rubs off on pitchers. The combination. I think this would have been a couple years ago, and Ethan Hearn catching DJ Hers was just like chef's kiss. Right? It was that combination of attitudes and the way they approach the game of baseball is so much fun. And I think that the Cubs are going to that route. We talked about it last week, talking about Pablo Aliendo and Bryce Wyndham and guys like that, where I think the Cubs are going to that route where it's like they want catchers that can manage a game. Casey Opitz is another guy. They want catchers that can manage a game, that can be strong defensively, and Ethan Hearn is that. And so I'm really excited to see what he does in South Bend this year. You're going to have a blast with him, man. You're going to have so much fun with him.
Oh, I'm sure. And the catchers of the Cubs farm system were fun because you got a whole lot of different kind of caliber guys. Not a lot of guys that are like incredibly highly rated relative to other people, only because the farm system was so deep. Mm-hmm. But you got guys like, I'm excited to see what Jake Washer does this year after what he did last year. Because I mean, you talk about good offensive numbers from Hearn. Look at what Wash did last year. It was just unbelievable. Not a guy who was catching every day, no matter where he was. You got a guy like Pablo who's still getting older and has been hitting so well. And then like you talk about the guys we'll have with Hayden and Hearn. Hearn's younger, but he's actually played about 170, 180 games in his career, pretty solid numbers last year. And then you get Hayden, who, only has that 1 year under his belt, but is a little older and who I've seen on, many lists as being a guy who could potentially break out. And then you mentioned Wyndham, who's still always going to be one of my favorites, just because I just have so much respect for guys who you talk about. He might be the opposite of Piñango. You talk about a guy who just sees the ball out of the hand and immediately knows ball or strike. And if he's swinging, I was like Piñango, he ain't missing. That guy does not swing and miss, does not have the power. But man, if that guy did have some pop in his bat, I remember when he hit his first home run with us, I was asking him what was going around, what was rattling through his mind. And he was like, I couldn't believe that I just hit one out. And he was talking about how surprised his family was and how happy they were. But man, Bryce Wyndham sees the ball and can put back the ball as well as anybody.
Dude, I'm unapologetically a big Bryce Wyndham fan. I mean, we had him on the Growing Cubs podcast when we did that show, and just a great dude. And I've said for a long time, if he can just have a little bit of power, I'm not even saying not even like 10 home run a season power, more doubles type power. He could be a really actual prospect here. Real quick,
I was gonna say just quickly. I think Wyndham had our best eye in South Bend in 2021 easily. A guy who I'm still a huge fan of, who if you also saw a little power uptick could be really something, is last year BJ Murray. I thought had the best eye at the plate with us. I don't think it was really close. That guy, his walk rate was, I think, at the end of the year was probably still above 1% higher than anybody else in the farm system. That guy sees the ball so well.
Yeah. If you guys out there listening want to hear Brendan King hear about his favorite player, go back and listen to the last episode. I think he went off for about 10 minutes on BJ Murray because he's a big BJ Murray fan. That's for sure.
Oh, hey, I think I was the first one on this train last year on there, really, really ramping up the BJ Murray talk because I just love what I saw everywhere. His first games in South Bend with us were in Quad Cities, and he wasn't hitting well. But his on-base percentage, after a week, you're looking at it, you're like, dude, his on-base percentage is 600. You're like, yeah, he's got 7 walks in 4 games.
He was batting 200 with a 700 OBP. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, the guy's just getting his way on anytime.
Yeah. You mentioned Jake Washer. Quick rundown of his stats from last year in South Bend because they're ridiculous. He batted almost 200 plate appearances. He batted 300 with a 365 OBP and a 606 slugging. He slugged the crap out of the ball last year.
Look up the day game stats because I know I tweeted it once. Jake Washer on Sundays. Oh my God! It is ludicrous. I think he was slugging 1,000 during day games. I want to say because it was just they knew when the sun was shining on Four Winds Field at 2:05 p.m. Jake Washer was going to be ruthless at the dish that day.
Yeah, Jake Washer. I'm trying to pull it up here. This was you tweeted this out in late July. So he would have been called up to Tennessee not too long after that, I think, right?
Yeah.
So through this is ridiculous, dude. This
is wild.
So through July 26th, in day games for Jake Washer, he was batting 392 with an 863 slugging, not an 863 OPS. ACC3 slugging with a 1302 OPS. He was 20 for 51 with 7 home runs and 18 RBI.
I want to say 22 for 50, so I would have been pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, outrageous. And he's a catcher, so you're just thinking like, oh, that's just impossible.
And speaking of guys that can slug behind the dish, Hayden McGeary is that guy. Like that's what Hayden McGeary is known for, right? Is that ability to slug. Whether he stays behind the plate or moves to DH and first base, I would probably lean for that. I would assume that he will ultimately be a first baseman in DH. But he was drafted as a catcher. Stupid like light tower power. There was one highlight of a home run that he hit last year in Myrtle Beach, and like we've talked again and again about how difficult it is to hit there. It was probably like the definition of a laser beam home run was that Hayden McGeary hit. He pulled it out to left field, and he's got that like every once in a while he'll finish with like the two-handed finish as opposed to the one-handed finish. And for some reason, like when you line one with a two-handed finish, it just like it looks different. And he hit it. There's like these bleachers out in left field in Myrtle Beach. And it went, and basically once the ball goes over those bleachers, like you kind of lose it in the camera. Like you can't really see it on MILB TV. And it got out over those bleachers in like a half a second, dude. Like it was a laser. It was insane. I'm excited to see if he can continue doing that. He was a D2 player at Colorado Mesa University. And so to kind of see how that D2 hitting translates, especially at altitude, right? To see how that translates to pro ball as he climbs up the ladder is going to be super interesting for McGeary. All right, time for the infield. We'll wrap up this episode. I think it's appropriate that we're wrapping up this episode with a pretty electric infield combination. So up the middle, we got Ed Howard and Kevin Madej, who I don't know which one's going to be at short, which one's going to be at second. I'm most excited for the fact that we did get word that it's more than likely Ed Howard will be assigned to an affiliate out of spring training, which is great coming back from his injury, assuming it'll be back in South Bend with you guys. I thought Ed looked a lot better, a lot more comfortable at the plate, even though the stats weren't like great. I just think watching his at-bats early on in the season last year, he looked more comfortable than he did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and the real shame there is that it felt like he was getting a lot better. I mean, week to week, day to day, he was getting more comfortable at the plate. You talk about, laser beam home runs. I remember his first home run last year was just like, you saw him swing and you saw that ball and how quickly it got over our tall left field wall. And you're like, that's a first rounder swing right there from a guy who, is absolutely just incredible at short. I'm just going to be so thrilled to see him back on a diamond. And if his first game, is with us the very beginning of the year, just seeing him at short back at home in South Bend or second base, whatever it winds up being. I think there's gonna be a lot of big smiles in the crowd just seeing him back and healthy on the field, because that day when he got hurt, I mean, it was just like the energy was sucked out of just about everywhere. And it happened in the ninth inning. Mervis wound up hitting a walk-off and wound up winning in that ninth inning. So that was a roller coaster of a night.
Yeah.
Then we're going down to the coaching staff and delivering the box scores. And I mean, really, like nobody cared about absolutely anything with the exception of how Ed was doing. And you knew the diagnosis wasn't going to be great. You saw him get up and then spike the helmet, just really show some frustration. So just seeing him back and healthy, we talked about Cole last year, just give me a healthy year. We can see a full healthy season of Ed Howard. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited. A guy who, not necessarily obviously forgotten, but when you miss a whole year after having, a first year that, wasn't tremendous at the plate, but I mean, his defense is going to be, absolutely top notch up the middle. I think you give him a full year, another guy is going to be just climbing prospect boards everywhere again, because you're going to be able to see Ed and see him back on the diamond.
You mentioned him like after the injury, like spiking his helmet, and how that probably had an impact on his teammates. Because I mean, we talk about his nickname Silk, and it's because he's smooth as hell out on the field. But like from my perspective, and you'd have a better perspective of this, it just feels like that's kind of his personality off the field too, where like very laid back demeanor, and like my guess is that had an impact on the team to see him react in that way, where like typically he's an even keel type of guy,
I love talking to Ed. You get a lot of young guys who talk like young guys. There's no offense to them. It's just like that's what anybody who's 19 to 22 talks like.
Yeah.
You talk to Ed and you feel like you're talking to like a veteran. Like he'll give you the exact quote you're looking for. He's just a treat to talk to. I'm sure Ed Howard has amazing parents, because he's just got a great head on his shoulders. He's so down to earth. He'll chat you up anytime. And honestly, it puts a smile on my face. Even just, I saw him at the Cubs convention for the first time since I saw him in person when he got hurt in South Bend. And man, that guy, he's got a big smile. He's got that Pablo Aliendo like big smile. Ed always puts a smile, I think, on anybody's face. And, he is so disciplined. And yeah, to see that reaction, that kind of visceral reaction from someone like that, I think he knew it was bad right away. But he's such a leader. He's a guy who just seems like he was schooled in how to talk. Maybe he was because he's a first rounder. Like, Brennan speaks very well to the media too. But Ed is something different.
Yeah, and what a good problem to have. Where like we might see Silk at shortstop, we might see him at second base, and the reason why we might see him at second base is because Kevin Miday's over there, and he plays a damn good shortstop defensively too. And he changed a lot last year as a player. He changed a lot at the plate specifically. But we still know how talented he is on defense.
Yeah, Kevin's great. Yeah, that arm strength and whatever it's on. I get a little excited when you see like that hard hit ground ball between short and third, and you're like, Verdugo, don't cut this off. Just let it run. Let Made backhand this.
Because we know Verdugo could cut it off and make a great play, but it's like,
oh yeah.
Time for Kevin.
As smooth as anybody at third, his run through, he's going to be on the money. But you want to see Made, lean on that right foot, rock back, and just uncork one. But I think Kevin grew a lot at the plate too. And we talk about, guys who maybe their numbers don't speak to how good they actually played. Like Kevin had some great at-bats, and he was really growing a lot, I think, throughout his time in South Bend, in which he started in the middle of the year as a 19-year-old. I mean, there aren't many of those in the Midwest League, and you can't expect them to go out there and go hit 300 when they're 19, debuting in a league where he's facing a lot of back end of games. You're facing like a 24-year-old probably out there, 23-year-old. But he had some great swings. He had a home run early that would have been his first home run that they said wasn't a homer, that it hit the wall, and it clearly didn't. He was bummed. I told him after the game. But Kevin's always a treat because he's so positive. That guy is always smiling. Pablo Aliendo is like the guy that just exudes happiness and just makes everybody happy around him. But Kevin's the same. He's quieter, but he's always smiling. He's always happy. And I'm excited to see the offense because not that him and Ed, like, I'm not excited to watch play defense, but like, it's going to be special. But like, if you see the specialness at the plate, like, then you really are onto something because they're both just, I mean, if there's a ground ball up the middle this year and it sneaks through, you're going to be like, hey, you see that?
Yeah. I mean, other people are talking about Nico and Dansby up the middle. I'm talking about Ed and Kevin.
Well, and then we got Alcantara maybe in center behind him. And you're like, because you're talking about, Bellinger up the middle at center for the Cubs. And it's like, we got a pretty good trio up the middle here.
Yeah, Ethan behind the plate, just like the Cubs have Tucker behind the plate. Like, the up the middle defense. I'm about it. I'm about that life. All right, last guy, and I'm saving the best for last. I love to talk about James Triantos, man. Like, is this the year that we see the breakout of James Triantos? Because I think that it is. He had a really decent year in Myrtle Beach last year. I think that for a 19-year-old getting his first taste of full season ball, he was about as consistent as you could hope a guy could be. He never really had those super high highs. He never really had too many where he was slumping for a month long or anything. He was very way more consistent. I think part of that is because his bat to ball skills are so good. And then when you have those good bat to ball skills, like, you're not gonna slump for a long time. You may not put together a month where you're batting 375 and hitting out 9 home runs, but like the consistency was there. I think that like getting out of Myrtle Beach is going to be great for James Triantos. I'm just excited to see what he can do, man. I'm excited for Triantos.
Yeah, whenever you're pegging somebody to have a real breakout year offensively with their numbers, it's always good to look at someone who maybe struggled a little bit in Myrtle Beach that's going to be starting the year in South Bend. Just because obviously ballpark wise, they're going to have a much easier go of it. But 19-year-old, I mean, talk about all the pressure, all the top 10 lists that he was on, and how excited people were to see him. And the numbers that dude put up in high school. I remember reading those on draft day, and you're just like, oh my, like, how could you hit that if you were playing T-ball? But I mean, I'm super thrilled to see what he'll do for us this year at third base. Now we're talking about it, we're like, I'm the last guy on the team on like the starting lineup. It's gonna be a fun year. But that's a guy who maybe fell a little bit in some rankings, but you look at a guy like Keith Law still has him, I think, at number 4. Mm-hmm. And a guy who certainly at the end of the year could be closer to 4 on a lot of lists because he just goes out there and rakes. And there's something to be said about a guy who puts the bat to ball just so well, and you kind of just expect that no matter what level he's at and what kind of growth he can make. A lot of people grow a lot from low A to high A, from year 1 to year 2. I think a lot of people are going to have an eye on him and an eye on. Now we're going to have a heck of a left side of the infield, a heck of the outfield. Whoever they put at second is going to be fantastic. You know, a guy who I actually got to see in person for the first time, who I haven't heard a ton about, but we talk about big dudes that look like ballers. I saw Felix Stevens take BP for the first time and stood next to him at first. And I had to lean over and be like, hey, is that Felix Stevens? They were like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, my.
No, that's a power forward in the NBA.
That dude, yeah, is that guy down low in the paint? Like, oh, my. That guy could take on Zach Edey. He was huge.
I would put Felix Stevens in the Fairleigh Dickinson starting lineup. So
their tallest guy's 6'6".
Yeah.
If you put him at center against those guys, boom.
That's a big dude.
More athletic than Edey is.
Yeah.
How's he going to handle that double down low, though? I don't know. I don't
know if he can handle the double, but like he could definitely give Edey a run for his money. That's for sure. I'd love to see him against Kofi Coburn from last year. I don't know about that, but Zach Edey.
Oh, man. Kofi, if Kofi was playing basketball in like 1970,
dude,
that dude would have been a top 5 pick and just dominating.
Dude, I've said for a long time, we're way off topic here, but I've said for a long time that, like, I mean, you look at like Dwight Howard being picked back like what 25 years ago now, 20 years ago, probably 20 years ago now.
It's like it was 25, man. That would feel
yeah, but probably 20 years ago, right? He would have been like 2004, 2003, 2005, somewhere around there. Kofi would have been like the number 1 pick in like those draft classes, right? The same type of vibe. But anyways,
would have been unstoppable.
Yeah. All right, man. We talked about a lot of dudes that will likely start off the year in South Bend here. I want to kick it to you. If there's anybody else that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention, or any guys that we talked about, Cade Horton early on, any guys that we don't expect to be assigned to South Bend to begin the year that you're excited to see maybe in the second half of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the tail end question there, I think my answer would definitely be Cade. I know we talked about him, but man, that Oklahoma team was a ton with Peyton Graham at short. What was their closer? They had a dynamite closer who rocked a really high number, who started some games, who was actually on West Michigan at the end of last year for us. They just had a ton of great dudes. And it was really fun to just watch their run and to watch, you know, kind of the main dude leading that rotation and Cade Horton and just that slider that just he could tell you it was coming and it really just didn't matter. But I'm pumped to see him in bird cell this year and what they do with these guys who were, you know, picked near the top end of the draft and, you know, Horton, one of the top few picks, and then didn't play. You know, a lot of organizations might rush a guy, but the Cubs, you know, take it easy. Their pitching development has just been stellar of late, and they just preach patience. And we'll see. They'll be coming out and throwing, I think, looking a lot different than what we saw probably from the end of their college days. But, I mean, man, think about the pitchers in this farm system versus where it was, say, you know, 5 years ago, and just all the potential, you know, front end starters if they really pan out the way you think they could. I'm really pumped to see what Cade will be this year. And I know he's probably starting in Myrtle, but let's hope that and I feel bad even like saying out loud that a guy could start in Myrtle for a half a year and then finish with us, because that's basically what their team did last year, and we won a title with those guys. We basically took their starting rotation like SpongeBob and just moved it over here, and then won a title. So, hopefully Myrtle starts with a great team this year, because we'll have a lot of those guys. Let's hope Cade pitches well. But yeah, and it's always special to have those first round guys, because I mean, at least in my experience too, like talking to Brendan, talking to Ed, talking to Wicks, they're always just, you know, freaks in terms of what they can do and what their potential is. But man, they, at least in the Cubs, the first round picks that I've met every year, they always are just so much like older in their personality and everything, and the head on their shoulders than like what the number on Baseball Reference says. Like, I don't care if he's 19 or 20. Like, Wicks goes out there and pitches, and you talk to him after the game, and you're like, is this guy like 32, like married with like a full family? Because like this is what talking to John Lester would probably be like.
Yeah.
They're just like so in control in like every element of their life, and you're like, this guy sounds smarter and more intelligent than me, and I'm clocking in at 27 years old and not on Baseball Reference. So,
but you probably have a better slider than Jordan Wicks, so right?
Yeah, I'm working on the Whirly actually in the offseason, so we're seeing what the Whirly's going to be working like. I'm excited to talk to Brostowski about the exact metrics of my Whirly.
Yeah, he can be your pitching coach. You're good to go. I appreciate the SpongeBob reference on this episode. It's probably the first SpongeBob reference we've had on the show. But I gotta say we've got to have more of these puppies.
Oh yeah, I mean we can make a pretty good like GIF of that from like Myrtle Beach to South Bend. Like just take Bikini Bottom and you just like pull a map up and like pull the starting rotation from Myrtle, move it and just pluck it in North Central Indiana.
We can get the listeners out there. If you guys want to meme for us, then you guys know how to do it. So
yeah, somebody get on that.
All right, Max. I appreciate you coming on. You want to plug yourself? What you're doing in the spring with any broadcast? Where you'll be on Twitter, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, coming up, we got, my weekend this week was just so up and down and all over the place, but I think it was 16 degrees when I got up this morning here in Chicago. So Illinois State baseball did not happen, but I'll be back doing some Illinois State baseball on ESPN Plus, I got Northwestern softball. They made a College World Series last year coming up next week, maybe a little Northwestern baseball. They're not nearly as good as the softball team, but fun local for me. I got Mizzou softball and baseball, which is quite a treat. I did gymnastics for Mizzou a few weeks ago. Top 15 matchup versus Alabama. That was quite a treat. And then somebody actually, my boss at Mizzou actually just texted me right before I got on air that it's the SEC gymnastics like championships today. And on like the promo, I think on the way in, they actually used a quote from me.
Nice.
In my first ever gymnastics meet, they used a Max Thoma soundbite.
Is there a sport you don't call? Is it like
I've never done hockey. Just because I was asked to do it once, but I don't know it well. I don't watch hockey. I don't know the rules. Actually, you know what? The next time we talk to BK, this is hilarious and like embarrassing to admit. BK's a big Florida Panthers fan, and last year NHL playoffs, he's like typing in his computer, and like the Panthers game is on a TV that he can't see, and he's like, "Hey Max, just give me some play-by-play." Within like 7 seconds, I said the word ball. And he's like, dude, it's not a ball. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not using this.
That's incredible. What's the hardest part for you? What's the hardest sport for you to call then? Is gymnastics or no?
It was the first time and only time I've done gymnastics. And,
it's not as fast-paced though.
Yeah, it's different because the whole show was different. Like we had a pregame show and all these elements built in. Like this script was huge. It was like the most dense script I've ever looked at. But it's basically just me tossing it up softball style to the color commentator who just runs with it. Because you think about like in baseball, like you don't really hear the color commentator during the actual play. Gymnastics is like the exact opposite. It's like she's running towards the apparatus, like quickly here's who she is and like how she does on this thing, and then they take over and they're like, oh, talking about all the flips and twists and stuff. And then you're just hoping you at the end say something that doesn't sound dumb. But gymnastics was actually a blast. It was so much fun.
That's awesome. All right, so people can find you on Twitter at Max Thoma, correct?
Yeah.
All right, man. Everybody follow. And for all the listeners out there, thanks so much, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on. We'll get you on throughout the season a little bit too to talk about the South Bend Cubs season as it's progressing, because that's always going to be fun. For listeners out there, be sure to subscribe on YouTube at Northside Bound. Subscribe on any podcast platforms you can find Cubs on Deck. Leave us a comment, leave us a review, all that good stuff. We always appreciate you listeners out there. And we're almost at the season. We're almost here. We got one more week of minor league previews. Again, Sam Wiederhatch will be on the show next week. We'll have a blast covering the Myrtle Beach Pelicans. Max, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you guys in one short week. Thank you guys.